There's a part of me that doesn't want to talk because that means the music stops, and I like this music.
I love the music.
I do too.
Let's just keep the music rolling. Keep the slate up. No, we shouldn't do that because of, I would do it if it was just you here, Nina, and if it was just you here, Brenda, but we have a special guest with us on this Friday. Look at that. Patrick Dooris joining us.
Good to see you.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, we're talking about you.
Why am I not hearing Pat? Are you guys hearing Pat?
Oh, there he is. I can hear him now.
Okay.
He's
hey,
just
Patrick.
messing with us.
Hello, hello,
Hey,
hello.
Pat, don't you know how this TV thing
This
works?
is a classic Zoom question, isn't it? Yeah, can you hear me?
Are you on mute?
Pat, of course, a veteran reporter here at KGW, been here for 3 decades, the 90s, the early 2000s, and this present decade. I guess this would be 4 decades now since it's 2020, Pat. We want to talk, though, about a series that...
Yeah, he will correct you. What year are you on, Pat?
I started at KGW in June of 1990.
Okay.
I remember when you got here, because I was just a few months before you.
Well, I knew that Brendan was late 80s and Pat was early 90s. I mean, that's as late 80s and as early 90s as you can get, you guys. Pat, one of the things you've done more recently, the Those Who Serve series, and I believe this started in late 2018. And in the early days of Those Who Serve, you used to come up to the Sunrise Show in the wee hours and deliver a little tease of that story to our audience. But we want to bring this up because this weekend, of course, is Memorial Day, and Memorial Day weekend will not look the same as it has for so many years now because we're not going to have large gatherings. We won't have the parades. We used to kick off Multnomah County Fair on Memorial Day weekend for so many years now. That's not happening either. But we still want to make sure that we do remember what Memorial Day is all about. And it's about those who served our country and lost their lives while serving our country. That brings us again to your segment, Pat, Those Who Serve. So can you talk about where this series started, what the inspiration for Those Who Serve was exactly?
Well, we wanted to start taking a little bit of time out of the, the day-to-day rush to cover all the bad news that's going on and really celebrate people that are making a difference in their communities. And didn't have to be something extraordinary, could be something small. As it turns out, a lot of the people we focused on are doing some extraordinary things. But sort of the idea is if we show somebody doing like 100%, maybe it'll encourage the folks at home to do like 2%, which would be 200% more than a lot of folks, including me, have been doing. So we just wanted to let people know, listen, there's a lot of good things going on in your community. You see flags on Southeast Hawthorne Street. It's because of the good folks at Jacaiva's that started that out years and years ago. And they just want to keep that going on. And they've handed it off now to the local Boy Scout troop. But they really wanted to remind people, listen, when you see the flags, remember that, it's the old cliche, but it's true. Freedom is not free. And a lot of people have dedicated their lives and sacrificed their lives to make this country what it is. And so this is a weekend really to remember that, besides having barbecues and starting to celebrate the beginning of summer.
Pat, one of the things I love about your reporting, and you have done so much over the years, is that what comes through to me is your true respect for the military. Can you tell us how that developed over the years? Where does that come from?
Well, I think a lot of it is from my brother, who was a Navy pilot, F-18 pilot, and I got to know a lot of his friends. And I've always really respected the men and women of the armed forces because of the dedication and the service. There's a lot of great benefits when people go into the military branches, but there's also a lot of self-sacrifice, discipline, determination. Those folks, especially the ones that are kind of in the middle and the upper ranks, they really do have their lives squared away, at least their professional lives. Nobody's perfect on the personal side, but it's a lot about integrity and doing the right thing for the right reason. And when I interview folks who are in the armed services, a lot of times they will say, I wanted to serve the country. I wanted to serve the people that live here. This is a great country, the greatest on the face of the earth. And I wanted to make sure that it stayed strong. I mean, it sounds corny, but to the people who are involved and who are putting their lives on the line, it's absolutely legit and it's absolutely true. And so I do respect that quite a bit.
I love during our newscast this morning, we were running some old video from, what was the year? 2003, where you actually went and joined your brother, during the Gulf War? Tell us about this experience, and you got to report it for KGW.
Right. Well, this was one of those adventures that I didn't really think was going to happen, but it did. And back then, when the war was getting close to starting, the military made it possible for reporters to go embed and live on the ships. We were the only local news crew, Rod Stevens and I, allowed to go and stay on the Abraham Lincoln. And we spent a month, almost a month, in the Persian Gulf. There I am. See how tired I'm looking there? That was back when I had sleep apnea, but did not know it.
Oh my God.
So
you had a baby
exhausted
face.
all the
You
time.
didn't look tired. You looked super young.
You still look super young.
I was younger,
when
yes.
we see that footage, I think like that
But
must
I
be
remember
Pat
being
from...
so tired.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, my brother at one point said, "Hey, don't tell anybody, and you can't report this, but there's going to be a missile launch at midnight tonight. You want to get up and watch it?" And I was so tired, I
gosh.
said, "Just tell me what it's like. I've got to sleep."
What? You said no to that?
What is this? World history?
know,
No
Pat.
thanks, I'll sleep. My goodness, Pat. It is funny to see that video because I was looking at it yesterday again, and it does. You do look so young, Pat. I'm thinking, is this from year one? Is this back in 1990? Maybe this was the first Gulf War. No, this was from 2003. So this is just 17 years ago, a 2003 version of Pat Dooris. And this clip that we're showing, you can see in the kind of the bottom corner of the screen there, the Inside Edition words, because Inside Edition said, this is a pretty cool story. We have one brother fighting for the country. We have another brother who's covering the war for his local TV station. So how did that Inside Edition story develop exactly?
Well, the reporter there, Paul, was one of the folks who were embedded on the ship. So there's about 15 or 20 of us, I think. Kira Phillips from CNN, all the big networks had their anchors there. And then it was just little old me and Rod Stevens, the local news guys. But the advantage that I had clearly was my brother, the guy who's showing me around there. And so while everybody else was sort of, rooming either with other reporters or sort of away, my brother put me in an empty bunk with 3 other pilots. And so I got to know these guys really well. And anytime I wanted an interview, it was super easy to do. And because they knew me and they trusted me. And it was all because of my brother. But that's how that happened. We ended up getting featured also in the New York Times, which I didn't read back then. And I didn't think that was any big deal. And then all of a sudden, I started getting calls from folks all over the country going, "Hey, man, I saw you in the New York Times."
Wow, that's cool. What's your brother up to
so
now?
it was really fun. And well, he's flying packages for Federal Express.
Oh, interesting.
For a while, he was a regional Horizon pilot, and then worked for a company called Atlas, which does cargo internationally. And then finally, just recently, in the last year or two, became a FedEx pilot, and he flies all over the world. So he's home in Spokane for a while, and then he takes off and is gone for a week or a couple of weeks. It's sort of like back in his military days where he'd be home for a stint and then gone for a stint and back and forth.
That's crazy. I have to say, I kind of fangirl when I see those fighter pilots. Even at the air show here in the Hillsborough area, it is just a sight to behold, those big planes. Do you have some more stories, anything else that stands out to you on those aircraft carriers? Because I really am fascinated by that whole life.
Yeah, well, it's an amazing thing that humans have created, this huge steel structure that can go out and stay out for a long, long time in the middle of nowhere. And all these crews, all the vests mean different jobs. But the fact that they can land these jets on these carriers is extraordinary. Out in the Persian Gulf, when there would be dust storms or sandstorms, the sand there is like a really fine talcum powder. So it would blow in sort of like a cloud. And I remember there was one day, and we had closed circuit TVs in our rooms. There was one day when they were trying to get the fighters back on the ship, and one guy was having trouble. He kept missing what they call I think it's the tripwire or the catch wire. So they told him in the middle of this sandstorm, "Listen, you've got to fly the approach of your life, and you've got to nail it this time, because you barely have enough gas to get to a divert landing strip if you can't make it." And it was really tense for about 15 seconds, and he nailed it. But, you know, there's just all kinds of stuff. It's also amazing how big these things are. You could spend a week without going up on top and being in fresh air and seeing the outside, just because there's so much to do inside and underneath. And they actually kind of discourage the sailors from going up top because it's so busy when the jets are moving around.
Hey, Pat, I'm curious, and we can probably show that footage again of you with your brother back then in 2003 during the Gulf War. You probably remember your brother talking about enlisting in the military and choosing that as his career. And so I'm curious, you know, what he said back then, why he wanted to do that. And when you talk to him now that he's retired and moved on, looking back, is that a decision he still is happy he made? Are there any regrets? I'm just kind of curious, the young version of your brother going into the military and then the version now who lived that, did that, and can talk about it.
Well, I should probably, you know, go spend another month with him to follow up and get the second part of that answer in true form. I think that it was a path that he wanted to do, and I think is very happy that he did. But I remember back when we were in high school growing up in the Seattle area, we'd go to the Sea Fest up at Green Lake or Lake Washington.
Seafair?
And I remember the Blue Angels flying overhead, and my brother saying, "I'm going to do that someday."
Huh.
And that, I think, is what really sparked it. And off he went. He went to University of Washington. We didn't have all that much money, so he went through ROTC and eventually went into flight school. And every step along the way, it was tough, but he kept clearing these hurdles and eventually became the leader of that squadron. And I'll say he continues to challenge himself, even learning how to fly these complex jets now for FedEx and all that. I mean, it's still, you know, in his mid-50s, he's still stretching his brain and learning how to do it and becoming very, very good at it.
Does your mom like him better?
Obvious.
I think so. He's always been the smart one. He's good at math and engineering. I like
just
English.
messing with you.
Can we add a
He
fifth
plays
box,
guitar
because I
and
think we need to
sings.
bring in a
He's
psychiatrist now.
Brett. Hey, Pat, how are you doing? You've been at home reporting, you know, from your office there for over 2 months now. I love how now this format, you know, people kind of get a glimpse into all of you. I mean, I've been here this whole time, so no one's getting a glimpse into my home life. But Pat, I love seeing all your race medals right there. And a viewer even asked about those. You did a whole little segment kind of explaining your path through triathlons and how you're training for an Ironman. Has this just been, I mean, in all your decades of reporting, like, where does this time right now, reporting and the technology that we're able to do this, like, kind of fit into your timeline of things? Like, this is wild.
Yeah, well, like everybody else, it's a weird time, Nina. It's just, yeah, and it's so busy. Every once in a while, I step back and go, I can't believe this is happening.
Yeah.
And it's happening all over the world, because every day, just like you guys, I'm so focused on getting the story out, getting it accurate, getting it in a timely way. One thing that's been nice is all of a sudden we're able to Zoom all over the place. So when I was talking to rural hospitals, I was able to Zoom over to Eastern Washington or Eastern Oregon, down to Southern Oregon, over to the coast, just boom, 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 in like 20 minutes, and talk to people that we would ordinarily not be able to get access to. And it's because we're able to travel at the speed of Zoom. And also we're only asking somebody for 5 or 10 minutes, and they're sitting in their office in front of their computer anyway.
Yeah.
So they're willing to talk to us. So that side has been terrific. The part I miss is actually traveling out to those places and hanging out with people for, 30 minutes, 45 minutes, because there's a lot of information that you can gather just by looking around or seeing somebody's body language, talking to them about how things are really going, stuff that we talk about when the camera is not rolling. So I do miss that part. It's also been interesting trying to corral the cats so that they're not meowing outside my door when I'm trying to interview the governor or somebody. That's been wacky. We just had a fence built outside. They were pounding outside my window all day, the last 2 or 3 days. So you just kind of work around that.
We've met a lot of
I'm still
KGW
not good at this
cats
technology.
over the past couple months. Matt Zaffino's cat Rocket was like biting him on the hand last night during his forecast on TV. It was great.
Hey, Pat, real quick, can I jump in? Because,
Sure,
after you were talking about being on that aircraft carrier and being super tired and not wanting to get up and, see all these missile launches, it brought back a memory, and I need you to fact check me, because I think it was back when I was anchoring with Carl Click. So that was a long time ago, but it was during the war, and it was during that shock and awe. You remember when they called that?
Yes.
Shock and awe, and you were doing phoners with us. Do you remember
sure
that?
That was February of '03, if I remember correctly. Somewhere in that ballpark, right?
Doris, do you remember that though?
I'm sorry, Drew, I was talking over you there.
February of '03. Do you remember shock and awe, when that was exactly? And do you remember your experience during that?
I don't. I know that we were on the aircraft carrier in March of 2003.
Okay.
Because what I remember...
And I also remember...
Sorry, I'm going to real quick because I'm going to finish what I was going to say. What I remember is that, if I recall correctly, again, it's many years, that before it hit like the AP and some of these other things, we were talking to you about it, and Carl looked at me off air and said, did Pat Dooris just break shock and awe, like break the news to us? What's your recollection of that?
Okay, I do remember that distinctly. So first off, the aircraft carrier, you know, the magical wizards that they have there, they were able to give us a local phone number as if the carrier was in San Diego, even though we were in the Persian Gulf. So that, number one, I was doing call-ins a lot. But the captain of the ship had said, listen, when we fire the first missiles and we send the first jets over Baghdad, you're going to wake up in the morning and we're going to play Lee Greenwood's I'm Proud to Be an American. And so one morning we woke up and sure enough, that was playing throughout the entire ship. And I remember saying, oh my gosh, I guess it started. And I think we were maybe doing a noon show with you. And I was saying, well, yeah, because, you know, it's just such a different world on the ship. It's like, well, yeah, we said we were going to do this and now we're doing it. And so here we go. And it really sort of caught me off guard that it had not been widely reported yet. That it was underway. And in fact, I remember the station being a little concerned going, you know, you might be wrong. Nobody else is talking about this yet.
Yeah.
And then
so crazy.
That's
well,
incredible.
Be careful with that. But then a few hours later, the reports started coming in like, oh yeah, hey, the U.S. is at war. And I'm sort of laughing. It wasn't funny that we were at war, but it was funny just sort of being in that little situation for a while and saying, oh my.
That's a heck of a scoop, my friend. Heck of a scoop.
That was March 22nd. I looked that up as you were explaining that story, Pat. March 22nd, 2003 is when the shock and awe campaign got underway. And I remember that as well. I wasn't working here at the time, but no one had the perspective that you had that day, Mr. Dooris. That is incredible. Before we let you go, we're coming up here. I know we have to split. We have to let you go because you have a work day ahead of you, I believe, Pat Dooris. But talking about more recent times, doing all the coverage that you've done during the pandemic over the last 3 months, a couple of stories I was curious about. Maybe one that's been most challenging, most difficult in telling, and one that's actually been really rewarding, and maybe a favorite story that you've covered over the last few months.
Well, thank you for putting me on the spot with that, Mr. Carney, as I quickly rack my brain and think about things. I think, okay, so maybe the most challenging was also the most rewarding. There was 1 week where I told the story of Mike Seeley's mom, who's a local mint farmer, and we had kept, for about 6 or 8 months, we've been trying to connect with his mom because of the work that she did during World War II, flying planes around the U.S., making sure that they were ready to go to war. And so we were going to do a Those Who Serve and profile her. Well, it turns out that she got coronavirus and then ended up in a hospital in the Bend area, and then died. But before she died, she celebrated a birthday, and the hospital staff videotaped it a little bit, and they really did everything they could to make it special for her. And after she passed, Mike got a hold of me, and it was a 2 or 3 day struggle to get, you know, the hospital to release the video. And then we interviewed Mike, and it was sad, and it was moving, and it was happy and celebratory and the whole thing. And so I think that's been my favorite story.
That was
so
a great story.
You wrecked me with that one. I was seeing
Is that the one that
and
you
hearing,
teared up at, Brenda? Yeah.
Yeah, I could barely speak, but it was such a beautiful tribute to his mom. Well done.
Good things come when you put Pat Dooris on the spot.
I wish the
that
video...
was a great story.
that's, writing that story made me cry too. So
Yeah.
I'm glad you felt
I
it.
get it.
So you can find a lot of Pat's work on our KGW YouTube channel, including the Those Who Serve series. We thought it would be great to have Pat on today as we kick off Memorial Day weekend. We want to make sure that everyone remembers what Memorial Day is all about, honoring and paying tribute to those who served our country and lost their lives while serving our country. Those Who Serve has been a great segment, Pat. And again, we should reiterate, it's not just about those who served in the military. It's about anyone in our community that continues to make a difference and serve in some way, shape, or form. Thank you, Pat. Going back to the beginning of this conversation, he started here in 1990, which means this year, the 30th anniversary year of Pat Dooris at KGW. How about the only one who beat you there, Pat, is though if you look up, you can see her. Tilt your head up. She's right above you. Brenda Braxton had that 30th anniversary last year. Pat, thanks again for joining us on this Friday edition of Sunrise Extra.